Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In the early to mid 90s, there was a big battle going on between two 16-bit systems. And you all know what I'm talking about. You had the Sega Genesis on one hand and the Super Nintendo on the other. Now, I ended up being a Sega Genesis kid, but initially I always wanted the Super Nintendo. But at the time, my parents thought that the Sega Genesis was the way to go because it was cheaper and it had a lot more games at the time, seeing as though that it had been out a little bit longer than the Super Nintendo had been. But that being said, I always thought that the Super Nintendo usually looked a little bit better as far as graphic-wise go when you're comparing the same games coming out on each system. But one of the things I always loved doing was looking at the games compared side by side in at the time, the gaming magazines, like maybe Game Informer. So today I'm gonna do kind of the same thing that they did back in the day with one of the games that I always would look at from side to side in Game Informer, and that's Street Fighter 2. Now, there were a bunch of different kind of Street Fighter 2s that came out. I'm gonna go and compare the ones that I know best. So for the Sega Genesis, it's gonna be the Super Street Fighter 2, because that's the one I had, and we're gonna compare that to the one that everybody talks to with the Super Nintendo, and that's Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Now, before people say, well, those aren't the same game necessarily, I know that, but these are the games I know best. So I'm going to admit that this is a little bit of apples to oranges, but that's okay. We're still going to see what the comparisons are, because they're still pretty much the same game with just a few minor differences. So let's jump in and take a look and see how each one rates with the other. Man, I absolutely love the intro to Super Street Fighter 2. I love how edgy and cool it is, and I think it's the closest one to the way the arcade game was. While I don't think Street Fighter 2 Turbo's intro is nearly as cool as the other one, but it's totally 90s and totally rad. So for all the game capture here, I use two FPGA systems, the Analog Super NT and the Analog Mega SG. Well, I definitely had to put this level in, because this is the one level that the magazines always compared. And what did they compare on this one, you ask? How did the wood floor look compared to one another? Yep, no joke, that's what they focused on.
Round one, fight! Sonic boom! Sonic boom!
Sound's always a big one too to take a look at. With the Super Nintendo, I feel like the music kind of lacks a little bit in some of the levels, but the sound effects always seem good, and it seems to be a little bit of vice versa for the Sega Genesis.
You lose!
Round one, fight! Sonic boom!
I always think that if you want to check out the differences between the levels as far as the background graphics, I think this is the one level that shows it the best. And, you know, I think it pretty much speaks for itself that the Super Nintendo definitely looks better than the Sega Genesis.
Sonic boom! Sonic boom!
I don't necessarily think that the graphics on the Super Nintendo are sharper than the Sega Genesis. It just seems that they have more of a definition where the Sega Genesis has more of a almost pixelated look.
Sonic Boom.
One, fight.
Well, if you haven't picked up on it yet, there's something there that the Sega Genesis does that the Super Nintendo does not, and that is there is slowdown. In spots, it can be kind of bad, but it's not horrible. Whereas the Super Nintendo, as far as I can see, I don't see any slowdown whatsoever.
Sonic Boom.
Round one, fight. Sonic Boom.
Even with the slowdown though, both games play the same. And that's great because no matter how great the graphics are or how good the sound is, if the controls on the game are horrible, then it just ruins it. But in this case, both of them play almost exactly the same.
Yoda fire. Yoda fire. Sonic Boom fire.
Alright guys, so what do you think? Did the Super Nintendo one look better? Or how about the Sega Genesis? If I'm being honest with myself and honest with you guys, in my heart of hearts, I really do think that the Super Nintendo one is a better version. There are some things about the Turbo one that I'm not crazy about. Like I said before, the sound seems to be a little bit off. And, you know, I guess this doesn't really have anything to do with the game, but I do love that opening sequence in the Sega Genesis one. Just little things like that that add to the game, but I think the gameplay overall is pretty close to one another. The slowdown is an issue, I mean, especially with a fighting game. Although I will say, and you know, obviously you don't want any slowdown, but on the Genesis one, you do kind of get used to it. So, but I still give, you know, the gameplay to the Super Nintendo Turbo Edition. So, but at the end of it, my heart is still with Super Street Fighter 2 on the Genesis. What can I say? I'm a Genesis guy. I will always be a Genesis guy, but I still give props to the Super Nintendo. It's a great system, and it's a great version of Street Fighter 2. Either which one would be a great pickup if you're looking to get into Street Fighter 2. So, well, that should just about do it this time. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.